The greatest tragedy in the history of the universe was not a war, but a family betrayal between the two most powerful beings ever created. Before Sauron, there was a master who made evil an art form, a being of divine fire who sought not to conquer the world, but to possess its very soul. His conflict was not for a ring of power, but for the very fabric of reality, a divine schism that makes the struggle between good and evil in Middle-earth seem like the final, fading echo of a much greater song. This is the story of the Valar, the angelic guardians who shaped the world. And it is the story of how the discord, sown by one of their own, Melkor, the brother of their king, became the source of all sorrow that would ever plague Arda. Before time, before space, before the first star ever kindled in the void, there was only Eru, the One, whom the Elves would later name Iluvatar. He existed alone in the timeless halls, a realm beyond comprehension. From his thought he brought forth spirits, the Ainur, the Holy Ones. They were the offspring of his mind, each understanding a part of his grand design, but none understanding all of it. For a measureless age he instructed them, revealing to them pieces of his vision through the medium of divine music. Then Iluvatar proposed a great theme, a composition of unimaginable complexity and beauty, and he bade the Ainur to make this theme into a great music. He told them to draw upon the powers he had given them, to adorn his theme with their own thoughts and inspiration, to create a symphony together. And so they sang. The voices of the Ainur, like unto harps and lutes and pipes and trumpets and viols and organs, and like unto countless choirs, began to shape the theme of Iluvatar into a vast and glorious sound. It filled the void, and it was no longer void. But among the Ainur, one was preeminent. Melkor was gifted with the greatest power and knowledge of all his brethren, sharing in some part the gifts of all the others. He had often wandered alone into the void, seeking the imperishable flame, the creative fire of Iluvatar, for he was filled with a burning desire to bring into being things of his own. He did not find the flame, for it was with Iluvatar. But in his solitude, thoughts and melodies began to arise in his mind that were not in accord with his creator's theme. He grew impatient with the grand design. He wanted to add his own. As the symphony swelled, Melkor began to interweave his own imaginings. His music was loud, vainglorious, and endlessly repeated. It was harsh and clamorous, a direct challenge to the theme of Iluvatar. A discord arose in the heart of the celestial choir. Those singing near him were dismayed. Their own thoughts were disturbed, their music faltered, and some even began to attune their song to his. The glorious harmony was thrown into a war of sound. It became a raging storm. Yet Iluvatar listened, and he sat upon his throne and smiled. For he raised his left hand, and a new theme began, like and yet unlike the first, and it gathered power and had a new beauty. But the discord of Melkor rose in uproar against it, and again there was a war of sound more violent than before. Then Iluvatar raised his right hand, and a third theme unfolded. At first it was soft and sorrowful, but it grew into a melody of profound depth, wider than the world, a sound of two musics interwoven, the beautiful and the tragic, the light and the dark. Melkor's proud anthem was at last drowned out, absorbed into the solemn pattern of this final composition. How can a sound born of rebellion become part of a divine plan? This question would haunt the very foundations of the world to come, for Iluvatar would show that no evil can be made that does not ultimately serve a greater, though often heartbreaking, purpose. The music ceased. Iluvatar rose, and the Ainur saw that he was stern. He led them out of the timeless halls and into the void, and he showed them what they had wrought. A vision. There, floating in the emptiness, was a world, made manifest from their music. They saw its history unfold, the oceans and the mountains, the forests and the clouds. They saw the very powers they had expressed in song take shape as the elements of a physical reality. And in this vision, they saw something new, something that came from Iluvatar alone, not from their music. The children of Iluvatar. The elves and men, the firstborn, and the followers. The Ainur looked with wonder upon these beings, so strange and free, and saw in them the ultimate expression of the third theme. And Melkor saw them too. He saw the gifts that Iluvatar would bestow upon them, and a bitter envy filled his heart. He desired to be their master, to bend their wills to his own, so that they might magnify his glory. He feigned a desire to care for them, to prepare the world for their coming, but his true purpose was to usurp them and the world they were to inherit. When the vision faded, many of the Ainur felt a deep yearning to make it real, to descend into that world and complete the work their music had only begun. And Iluvatar, perceiving their will, spoke one word, Ea, let it be, and the world was. The greatest of the Ainur who chose to enter this new reality, binding themselves to it until its end, were known as the Valar, the powers of Arda. There were 14 in total, 7 lords and 7 queens. But Melkor was the first to descend. He arrived while the world was still a formless, fiery chaos, a turbulent storm of matter, and he looked upon it and claimed it for his own. But he was not alone for long. Manwë, his brother in the thought of Ilúvatar, noblest of the Ainur, followed him. Manwë Sulimo, lord of the breath of Arda, who loves the winds and the clouds and all swift birds. He was appointed to be the king, the viceroy of Ilúvatar on earth. He is a ruler without pride, who does not understand evil, not even in its seed. His spouse is Varda, the lady of the stars, she whose beauty is too great for words. The light of Ilúvatar lives in her face, and it was she who kindled the stars themselves from the silver dews of creation. Melkor hates her most of all, for she saw the darkness in his mind before the music began, and she rejected him. Her light is his deepest fear. Then came Akul the smith, the master of all crafts and substances of which Arda is made. The rocks and the gems are his work, and the forging of the great mountains was his delight. His nature was in some ways most like Melkor's, for both delighted in the making of things new and of their own design. But Afule sought to remain true to the vision of Ilúvatar, creating in service, while Melkor desired only to possess and dominate. Axul's spouse is Yavanna, the giver of fruits, who loves all things that grow. She is the green earth, the mother of all forests and fields. And there was Ulmo, the Lord of Waters, who dwells alone. He comes not to the councils of the Valar, for his domain is the entire world, the deep oceans, the flowing rivers, the mists and the rains. From his abyssal halls he weaves his own music, and it can be heard in the sounding of the waves and the cry of the seabirds. He loves the children of Ilúvatar, and has never forsaken them, often working his will in secret when all other hope seems lost. But what are gods without death and dreams? For that there were the 2 brothers, the Feanturi, masters of spirits. The elder was Nemo, though he is better known as Mandos, for he dwells in the halls of Mandos, the house of the dead. He is the doomsman of the Valar, who forgets nothing and knows all things that shall be, save those that Ilúvatar alone holds secret. His younger brother is Irmo, the master of visions and dreams, who resides in the tranquil gardens of Lorien, a place of rest and spiritual healing for all who dwell in the divine realm of Valinor. These powers, and others, Nienna the Weeper, Tolkas the Strong, Orome the Hunter, they all descended into the unmade world, and found that Melkor was already there, undoing their work as fast as they could create it. The first war began. This was not a clash of swords and shields, but a battle of cosmic forces for the very shape of the planet. When the Valar dug valleys, Melkor thrust them up into mountains. When they carved out seas, he made them boil and spill over the land. When they raised pillars of stone, he shattered them into dust. For ages, Arda was a world of tumult, its surface scarred by fire and ice, as the will of the Valar clashed against the malevolence of their fallen brother. The Valar grew weary, for Melkor's power was immense. But as he raged, a great laughter echoed from the heavens. Tolkas the Strong, the wrestler, descended last of all. He was a being of pure physical might and joy, his hair and beard golden, his flesh ruddy. He cared not for the past or the future, but only for the present contest of strength. He drove Melkor before him with sheer force and laughter, and for the first time, the great enemy knew fear. Melkor fled from Arda, retreating to the outer darkness beyond the walls of night, to bide his time. With Melkor gone, a great peace fell upon the world. The Valar at last brought order to the lands and the seas. To light their kingdom, Atul forged 2 colossal lamps. In the north he set Iluin, filled with a silver light, and in the south, Ormol, filled with golden light. The light of these lamps blended in the center of the world, on the Isle of Almarin where the Valar made their first home. This was the spring of Arda. Under the eternal, gentle light, Yavanna brought forth the great seeds. Forests of unimaginable size grew, and beasts of all kinds, great and small, walked the earth. For a long age, the Valar dwelt in contentment on Almarin, and all was beautiful. They believed their work was done. They believed their enemy was defeated. They were wrong, for while they rested in the light, Melkor had returned in secret. Far in the north, under the mountains, he had delved the first of his great fortresses, the citadel of Utumno. There he gathered to him the spirits who had been corrupted by his music, the Maiar who would become the Valaraukar, the demons of terror, the Balrogs. And from the darkness of his envy, he bred monsters, twisting life into new and horrible forms. The poison of Utumno began to seep into the world, withering the perfect spring of Arda. The Valar, dwelling in their light, did not perceive the growing shadow in the north. They were planning a great festival, celebrating the fruits of their labor. The feast was set, and the Valar were gathered in joy upon their isle. But at that very moment, as Tulkas the Strong lay sleeping after his labors, Melkor and his armies descended from the north. He passed over the walls of night with his host, and assaulted the two lamps. He cast down their mighty pillars, and the vessels of light were broken. A cataclysm of fire and flood engulfed the world. The perfect symmetry of Arda was shattered, and the first kingdom of the Valar on the Isle of Almarin was utterly destroyed. Darkness fell once more upon the face of the earth. The Valar were aghast. Their first great work was undone, their first home annihilated. They could not defeat Melkor in open war without completely unmaking the very world they sought to build. And here, we must ask a terrible question. Was plunging the world into darkness Melkor's only goal? Was it simple destruction he craved? No, the darkness was not the end. It was the means. It was a shroud. For Melkor knew something the other Valar had not yet grasped. The children of Ilúvatar, the elves and men, were soon to awaken somewhere in the shadowed lands of Middle-earth. Melkor did not want to rule a broken world. He wanted to be the first thing the children saw. He wanted to be their god. The darkness was his cloak, allowing him to stalk the continent unseen, to twist the land to his will, and to prepare a welcome of shadow and fear for the firstborn. The destruction of the lamps was not an act of rage. It was a calculated, strategic masterstroke to seize the future. Faced with this grim reality, the Valar made a choice that would define the fate of the world for all ages to come. They abandoned Middle-earth. They retreated. They crossed the Great Sea to the westernmost continent and named it Aman, the Blessed Realm. There, they raised a defense so mighty that not even Melkor could assail it. The Pelori, the mountains of Aman, the highest peaks in all of Arda. Behind this colossal wall, they established their new kingdom, Valinor, a land of eternal light and guarded peace, but also a land of self-imposed exile. They would fortify their own garden while leaving the rest of the world to the growing shadow of their enemy. Within the encircling mountains, they built their city of Valmar with its silver domes and golden gates, and upon the green hill of Azelohar, a new plan for light was conceived, one that would be far more beautiful and far more tragic than the great lamps they had lost. But was this retreat truly a wise defense? Or was it the first great mistake of the gods? By creating their perfect, isolated paradise, were they not also creating a prison, both for themselves and for the light they so cherished? They sought to protect the world's beauty, but in doing so, they began to hoard it, and this act of hoarding would have dire consequences. For while Yavanna sang on the hill of Azelohar, bringing forth the most beautiful sources of light the world would ever know, the darkness in Middle-earth was not empty. It was watching, it was waiting, and it was working. These were the two trees of Valinor. The elder was Telperion, who bore blossoms of shining silver that shed a cool, gentle light. The younger was Laurelin, who bore leaves of gold and flowers like a yellow flame, giving off a warm, brilliant radiance. For 7 hours, one would wax to full glory and then wane, and in its final hour of fading, the other would begin to wax. Twice a day in Valinor came a moment of soft mingling twilight, when the silver and golden lights were blended. The Valar were content. In their guarded land, they had recreated a perfect light, a perfect order. They measured time by the flowing of the trees, and the ages of the trees began. But what of the land they had abandoned? What was Melkor doing while the gods built their paradise behind impenetrable mountains? Was he simply waiting? No, he was engaging in the ultimate act of blasphemy. Melkor could not create life, for that power belonged to Ilúvatar alone. The secret fire was not with him, but he could mar and twist and ruin. And so he began his most vile work. He sent out his hunters and spies across the darkened continent, searching. He knew the children of Ilúvatar would awaken soon, and he was determined to find them first. And he did. It is told that some of the first elves, before they had even seen the Valar or learned of their purpose, wandered too far from the waters of their birth and were captured. They were taken by the dark hunters, dragged in terror north, and cast into the pits of Utumno. What happened to them in those dungeons of despair is a torment to speak of. Through arts of unimaginable cruelty, by slow and wicked processes, Melkor corrupted and enslaved them. He twisted their very being, breaking their bodies and their spirits, remaking them in his own image of malice and misery, a mockery of the children Eru loved most. This was the origin of the orcs, an army of slaves, filled with a bottomless hatred for the master who made them, but an even greater hatred for the free peoples of the world. This was Melkor's masterstroke of evil, not just creating monsters, but perverting the most beautiful of creations into his most foul. And the Valar, dwelling in their golden light across the sea, knew nothing of it. Their blissful isolation had made them deaf to the screams of the firstborn. Yet, not all was lost to darkness. Varda, the queen of the Valar, she who is called Elbereth, the Star Queen, looked out from the peaks of the Pelori and saw the great shadow over Middle-earth. Her heart was grieved for the children who were to come. So she took the silver dews that had been collected from the tree Telperion, and she made new stars, brighter and clearer than any that had been before. She scattered them across the heavens, as a challenge to Melkor, and as a sign of hope for those who would awaken in the dark. And it was at the very moment that Varda finished her great work, as the new stars glittered in the sky for the first time, that the prophecy was fulfilled. Far in the east of Middle-earth, by the starlit bay of a lake called Quivien, the waters of awakening, the elves awoke. They awoke with no memory of their making, only the immediate and profound knowledge of their own being. They were, and as their senses opened to the world, the first thing they perceived was the light of Varda's stars, glittering in the high heavens and reflected in the still face of the lake. This was the sight that filled their hearts with wonder, and they would love the light of the stars forever after. They began to speak, and their first words were filled with awe for the world they saw. Finding no others who could speak or sing as they did, they named themselves the Quendi, meaning those who speak with voices. They wandered by the shores of Quivien, and their first days were a time of perfect innocence, a waking dream under the new stars, their minds filled with a thirst for knowledge, and their ears with the music of the flowing water. But even in this pristine moment, a shadow lay unseen. The spies of Melkor, creatures of stealth and malice, had already found them. From the dark woods and the cold hills, they watched the Quendis, and word was sent north to Utumno. The Dark Lord now knew that the children of prophecy had come. The most beautiful and the most vulnerable of all Iluvatar's creations were now adrift in a world he had claimed as his own. And so the great theme of the world's song truly began, a theme of starlight and shadow, of awakening innocence and ancient evil. The fate of Arda now rested not with the gods in their blissful kingdom of light, but with these new, fragile children, singing their first songs in the twilight of Middle-earth, unaware that the long war for their very souls was about to begin. The firstborn have awakened, and the tale of the elder days has just begun. To follow their fateful journey from the starlight of their birth to the great wars against the shadow, subscribe to the Silmarillion Chronicles, and do not miss a single chapter of the